serious? The Indiana Fever just lost Justine Parisien to the Las Vegas Aces, and forget what her signing. It's official now. Chloe Peterson just put out that the Indiana Fever will not be countering the offer from the Aces. They're letting her walk so they could keep Dantas.
There's a question every sports fan eventually has to ask about their team. Do these people actually want to win? Not in the press conference. We're committed to excellence way. In the real, tangible, I will make hard decisions to build a championship way. The Indiana Fever just answered that question, and it's not the answer Caitlin Clark deserves. On January 14, 2025, the Las Vegas Aces submitted an offer sheet to Indiana Fever developmental player Justina Parisien. Under league rules, Indiana had exactly 24 hours to respond, promote her to a standard roster spot and keep her or watch her walk to the defending champions. Reporter Chloe Peterson broke it first from the WNBA transactions page, and then minutes later the follow-up hit. Indiana wouldn't be countering. They were letting her go. A 6'4" sharpshooter with a 7-foot wingspan, a player who had done everything asked of her and more, was now officially property of the Las Vegas Aces. And the reason Indiana walked away, they wanted to keep Damiris Dantas, a 32-year-old center who averaged 3 points and 1 rebound in last year's playoffs. Let that sit for a second, because the more you think about it, the worse it gets. Before we get into the dysfunction, and we will get into all of it, you need to understand exactly who Justina Parisien is. Because the casual fan might not know her name yet, and honestly, that's part of the problem. Parisien stands 6'4" with a 7-foot wingspan. In basketball terms, that combination isn't just impressive, it's genuinely rare. You're talking about a player with real interior size who can also step out and punish defenses from well beyond the arc. Defenders can't sag off her because she'll drill them from 25 feet. They can't play physical with her in the post because she's...
This was from Chloe Peterson. Per the WNBA transactions page, the Las Vegas Aces have tendered an offer sheet to the Fever developmental player Justine Parisien. The Fever had 24 hours to respond, putting her on a standard roster. But then she just put this up. I'm told, per league sources, the Fever will not be countering Parisien's offer sheet from the Aces. This is crazy. Y'all just let the world champs pick up a 6'4" sniper, a 6'4" shooter with a 7-foot wingspan.
She's got the length to get her shot off regardless. She creates matchup problems that most defenders simply aren't equipped to handle, and in a league that increasingly rewards players who force impossible defensive choices, that skill set is gold. The numbers backed it up immediately. In her only preseason appearance, a game against the New York Liberty, Parisien dropped 10 points in just 3 minutes of action. She was pulling up confidently from deep, moving without the ball, finding open spots, and showing the kind of offensive fluency that takes most players years to develop. 10 points, 3 minutes, 1 game, and then Indiana never played her again. But here's what makes this story even more layered. Parisien made her position crystal clear from the very beginning of the season. She wasn't interested in sitting on a developmental contract indefinitely. She wanted a real roster spot. She wanted actual minutes in actual games. She communicated that openly, told people around the organization that she wasn't settling for developmental status when she genuinely believed she could contribute at the full WNBA level. The Fever heard that, they understood exactly what she was asking for, and they responded by doing absolutely nothing. No promotion, no expanded preseason role, no conversations about a path to a standard contract, just silence. And while Indiana was busy doing nothing, the rest of the league was paying attention. Championship organizations don't miss players like Parisien. They find them, they study the film, they make their move at exactly the right moment. The Aces were all...
Congratulations. She'll be making $150,000 for the rest of the season rather than the $700 a week from the Indiana Fever. And she's going to get a chance to actually play for this team. She's going to get a shot to play. Justine Parisien just left the Fever for the Aces, dog. They decided to keep Damiris Dantas, man. They decided to keep Damiris Dantas, y'all. We let her walk. We just let her...
Already watching. Indiana just didn't know it yet. What makes Parisien's profile so valuable isn't just the physical tools, it's how those tools translate into real basketball situations. She doesn't need the ball in her hands to impact the game. She can relocate to open spots off the ball, catch and shoot with confidence, and attack closeouts when defenders sprint at her. She can finish through contact when smaller guards try to body her up. She reads the floor quickly and makes the right decision under pressure. These aren't developmental traits that need years of polishing. These are ready-now skills that any competent coaching staff could deploy immediately. And yet Indiana kept her in the shadows. 1 game, 3 minutes, 10 points, then nothing. The front office had a player who showed them exactly what she could do in the most limited sample size imaginable, and their reaction was to put her back on the shelf and hope nobody else noticed what was sitting right in front of them. The Aces noticed. The Aces always notice. And by the time Indiana got the offer sheet notification on January 14th, it was already too late to undo months of neglect with a 24-hour decision. The damage was done long before the deadline arrived. But that's only the beginning of what went wrong here, because Parisien wasn't just a good player Indiana failed to develop. She was the specific solution to Indiana's biggest problem. To understand why losing Parisien hurts as much as it does, you have to understand the single biggest tactical.
Justine Parisien, a 6'4" young sniper with a 7-foot wingspan. They let her walk for Damiris old ass I can't play no more Dantas. 3 points and a rebound a game. Like, come on, man. You can't be serious. You got this, but this organization is a joke. Justine Parisien, she let it be known earlier in the season that she wasn't looking to stay on a developmental contract. She wanted out of the developmental spot. She did not want that. She said, "I'm not settling for a developmental spot. I want a real roster spot." She let that be known from beginning of the season. The Indiana Fever did nothing. They kept Damiris Dantas, bro. This is
problem that has plagued this Indiana Fever team for the past 2 seasons. And it's not complicated. Go back and watch any Fever game from last year, any game at all. Within the first quarter, you'll hear the broadcast analysts circling back to the same issue. Indiana can't space the floor. Defenses don't respect their perimeter shooting, so they pack the paint, collapse on Clark's drives, and dare Indiana's role players to beat them from 3. And most of the time, it works. Caitlin Clark is extraordinary, genuinely one of the greatest passers women's basketball has ever seen. Her ability to thread the needle in transition, find cutters with no-look dimes, and locate shooters off the drive-and kick is operating on a completely different level from most players in the league. But elite passing only creates advantages when defenses are forced to make real choices about who to cover. When every player around Clark is a below-average three-point shooter, defenses don't face those choices. They load up on Clark, pack the lane, and let everyone else try to beat them. Most of the time, everyone else doesn't. Parisien changes that equation entirely. At 6'4", she's not a defensive liability that opposing teams can hide their weakest defender on. She's a genuine defensive presence with the wingspan to contest shots and disrupt passing lanes. But offensively, she does exactly what Indiana has been desperate for. She pulls her defender out to the three-point line, instantly creating space in the paint for Clark's drives. She can catch and shoot off drive-and-kick passes without needing extra dribbles to get set. She punishes help defenders who close out too hard by attacking off the dribble. She makes defenses pay for every mistake, and she does it from a position on the floor that directly benefits the player running the offense. This isn't a case of a good player who might—
I can't say I'm surprised, and I told you guys earlier in the playoffs, when she played in that preseason game, earlier in the preseason, when she played in that one preseason game versus the New York Liberty, the girl had 10 points in 3 minutes. She was pulling up from deep, and then she never played in any preseason action after that. I told y'all they were trying to hide her. I told y'all they were trying to hide Justine Parisien because somebody would come and take her, and Justine Parisien is officially gone. Justine Parisien is officially gone off the roster.
Eventually figure out how to fit next to Clark. Parisien was already built for exactly this role. The spacing she provides, the defensive respect she commands from the three-point line, the way she moves without the ball, all of it maps perfectly onto what Clark needs to operate at maximum efficiency. Finding that kind of natural fit anywhere in the draft, in free agency, in trades is genuinely difficult. Indiana had it on their developmental roster, and they walked away from it. Think about what that means in practice. Every time Clark drives into a packed paint and has nowhere to go, every time she gets doubled off a pick and roll, and the kick-out pass goes to someone defenses aren't afraid of, every time a design play breaks down because there's no credible shooting threat to collapse the defense, all of that is the Parisien problem made visible. Indiana's offense becomes dramatically easier to defend the moment opposing coaches realize they don't have to respect the perimeter. And right now, opposing coaches don't. Adding Parisien doesn't just fix one possession here or there. It changes the defensive calculus of the entire game. It forces opponents to account for a 6'4" shooter who can hurt them from distance, which opens driving lanes, which creates easier shots, which makes Clark's job significantly less exhausting. The ripple effect of one high-quality floor spacer on an offense built around a generational passer is enormous. Indiana understood this. You could hear it in every broadcast, read it in every film breakdown. They knew what the problem was, they had the solution, and then they let the Aces take it. After Parisien's 10-point explosion in 3 minutes against the Liberty, Indiana made a very deliberate...
I mean, whatever, man. This team is a clown show. This team is a joke. And it just is what it is, man. It is what it is, man. Justine Parisien, go have a time in Vegas with the Aces. You're going to have an opportunity to win a world title. You're going to get to play with Asia Wilson, who'll probably be the MVP. And you get to get away from this Stephanie White clown show. You get to get away from this Stephanie White clown show. That is the Indiana Fever. It's ridiculous.
Decision. They kept her off the floor for every remaining preseason game, not because she wasn't performing, not because she was dealing with an injury. Based on everything that's come out since, the front office strategy appeared to be straightforward. If other teams don't see her play, they won't know what they're missing, and Indiana can keep her tucked away on the developmental roster without competition. Think about what that strategy actually reveals. It means Indiana's own front office knew she was talented enough to attract interest. They recognized that if the rest of the league saw what she could do, someone would come in with an offer. So rather than promote her and use her, rather than integrate a clearly capable player into a rotation that desperately needed her skill set, they chose concealment. They decided the best way to protect their asset was to pretend it didn't exist. In what universe does that make basketball sense? You have a developmental player who proves in 3 minutes of action that she belongs on a standard roster. You have a team with an obvious floor spacing problem. You have a franchise cornerstone who would directly benefit from having a legitimate perimeter threat next to her. The intelligent response to all three of those facts is identical: put Parisien in the rotation, develop her properly, and watch the offense improve. Indiana's response was to hide her from the rest of the league and hope nobody looked too closely. The Aces look very closely. Championship organizations always do. They don't just watch the broadcast games, they study practice reports, track developmental rosters, analyze film on players that other teams are underusing. Las Vegas identified exactly what Indiana was sitting on. They saw the size, the shooting mechanics, the defensive tools. They watched the Liberty...
And all we talk about is we need to stretch for... Damn it, I would have took Justine Parisien over Michaela Timpson. But Michaela Timpson, they don't guard that girl on offense. I'm sorry. We like KK. I would have rather seen Justine Parisien get a chance to play. When Michaela Timpson is out there, they don't guard her. They don't stand next to her. We needed an actual stretch for, and Justine Parisien could have been perfect next to Caitlin Clark.
Tape and understood immediately what those 10 points in 3 minutes represented, and they started building their plan. When the window opened on January 14th, the Aces moved without hesitation. Offer sheet submitted. 24 hours on the clock. Indiana had one last chance to reverse course, acknowledge the value they'd been neglecting for months, and make the right call. Instead, they declined. The strategy that was supposed to protect Parisien had handed her directly to the team Indiana can least afford to make stronger. And now the Fever have absolutely nothing to show for it. No Parisien on the roster, no trade compensation, no draft pick, no salary relief that could be redirected toward a different upgrade, nothing. They lost a player who could have contributed meaningfully to their rotation, and in exchange they got to keep a situation that wasn't working in the first place. That's the full return on the hide-her strategy: 0 assets and a stronger opponent. The part that makes it even harder to process is the timeline. Indiana had all season to promote Parisien. Every single week from the first training camp practice to the moment the offer sheet landed was an opportunity to do the right thing. They had months to look at their floor spacing problem, look at their developmental roster, and connect those two dots. They chose not to week after week, until the choice was taken away from them by an organization that moves faster and thinks clearer. The cover-up failed. The player they were hiding is now in Las Vegas, and the front office that orchestrated the whole strategy has to explain to Fever fans how letting the Aces get stronger while Indiana got nothing is part of any coherent plan. The explanation, when it comes, is going to be very hard to sell. Let's be direct about what Indiana decided was more valuable than Justina Parisien. Damiris Dantas has been in the WNBA since 2012, over a decade of professional experience, and veteran presence does have genuine value: leadership in the locker room, playoff composure, the ability to keep younger players grounded when the moment gets big. These things are real, and they don't always show up on a box score. That argument deserves at least a fair hearing. So let's give it one. In the 2024 playoffs, the most important games of the season, the moments where roster construction gets its most honest evaluation, Dantas averaged 3 points and 1 rebound per game, 3 and 1. And these aren't heavy minutes numbers that get dragged down by an off-shooting night. This is spot time, garbage time, foul trouble rotations, situations where the game has largely been decided and coaches are managing minutes rather than competing for wins. In the moments that actually mattered in Indiana's season, Dantas was essentially invisible. The veteran leadership argument also runs headfirst into a very specific wall. The Fever got swept in the first round. Whatever experience and stability Dantas brought to that locker room didn't translate into a single playoff win. The composure didn't show up in the results. The leadership didn't change the outcome. At some point, accountability has to mean something. At some point, the results on the court have to matter more than the narrative around the roster. Now compare that directly to what Parisien offered. Young, ascending, physically gifted, already demonstrating WNBA-level production in limited action. And representing exactly the profile of player that modern basketball rewards. The choice between those two options, a 32-year-old averaging 3 and 1 in the playoffs versus a young shooter with elite physical tools and a proven ability to score at this level, shouldn't require extended deliberation. It's not even close when you lay it out plainly. But here's the layer that transforms this from a bad decision into a genuine pattern. This isn't the first time Indiana has chosen familiarity over potential. Look at their draft strategy over the past several years, the tendency to reach for known quantities rather than swing on upside. Look at their coaching decisions, their roster management philosophy, the way they've handled young players trying to break into the rotation. There is a consistent thread running through all of it, and that thread is a front office that trusts what it already has far more than what it could build. That instinct, protect the established, minimize risk, avoid the hard decision, might be understandable in a front office trying to survive. It is completely incompatible with a front office trying to build a championship around a generational player. Championship rosters require difficult choices. They require letting veterans go when younger players outgrow them. They require making uncomfortable calls that prioritize winning over comfort. Indiana has repeatedly shown they are not willing to make those calls. The Dantas over Parisien decision is the clearest version of that failure to date. Not because Dantas is a bad person or a bad teammate or someone who hasn't earned her place in the league, but because keeping her over a young, ascending, perfectly suited player sends an unmistakable message about what this organization values. It says, we will protect what's familiar, even when the evidence tells us something different is necessary. That's not a philosophy that wins championships. That's a philosophy that keeps franchises exactly where they are talented enough to be interesting, not serious enough to win when it counts. While Indiana is preparing to defend a decision most basketball observers find genuinely baffling, Justina Parisien is walking into the best possible situation a young developing player could land in. And the contrast between where she's going and where she came from couldn't be more stark. The Las Vegas Aces have won back-to-back WNBA championships, 2022 and 2023. They've assembled one of the most complete rosters in the league around A'ja Wilson, who's tracking toward what would be her third MVP award. Their coaching staff has a proven track record of developing players, deploying them intelligently, and creating systems that maximize individual strengths. Their front office has demonstrated repeatedly and publicly that they understand how to identify undervalued players and put them in positions to succeed. This is not an organization running on luck. This is a machine built to win. Parisien is going to get real minutes in real games with real stakes attached to them. She's going to develop alongside players who have been in championship situations, who understand what it takes to perform when the margin for error disappears in the playoffs. She's going to be coached by people who will study her game, identify her strengths, and design situations where her specific skills, the three-point shooting, the defensive length, the ability to score without needing heavy ball-handling responsibilities, are featured and rewarded. Now contrast that with her Indiana reality. 3 minutes of preseason basketball, no path to meaningful rotation time, a developmental contract with no clear timeline to promotion, a front office that apparently saw her primary value as something to be concealed rather than developed, a coaching staff that never found a way to use a 6'4" shooter in a system desperately crying out for exactly that player. That's not a development environment, that's a dead end. The financial difference alone tells a significant part of the story. $700 a week on a developmental deal versus $150,000 for the remainder of the season with the Aces. That's not a modest upgrade, that's a completely different professional life. And beyond the money, there's the development time that can't be recovered. Every week, a talented young player spends sitting on a bench instead of competing in real game situations is growth she can never get back. Indiana wasn't just underpaying Parisien, they were costing her the experience she needed to reach her ceiling. In Las Vegas, none of those obstacles exist. The Aces will put her in positions to succeed because that's what they do with players they acquire. They'll study her game, identify the spots where she can contribute immediately, and build her role from there. They'll surround her with veterans who elevate everyone around them. They'll give her playoff experience that accelerates development faster than any practice session ever could. And here's what Fever fans need to sit with. In 2 or 3 years, when Parisien is a legitimate rotation contributor on a championship-caliber team, when she's hitting big shots in meaningful games, when she's developed into exactly the player her physical tools always suggested she could be, Indiana will have nothing to point to. No draft pick acquired in a trade. No salary cap flexibility gained from the decision. No improved roster as a result of the choice. Just the memory of a 24-hour window where they had one last chance to keep her and decided not to. The Aces didn't just add a developmental player. They added a player with a legitimate ceiling who was being wasted in the wrong environment and who now has every resource necessary to reach that ceiling. That's how good organizations operate. Indiana just gave them a tutorial on how bad ones do. This is where the conversation has to shift, because as damaging as the Parisien decision is by itself, it becomes exponentially more concerning when you consider what it signals for the most important person in this entire situation. Caitlin Clark is going to be a transcendent basketball player regardless of what the Fever put around her. That's not a debatable point. Her talent, her competitive instincts, her basketball intelligence, these qualities will produce remarkable individual performances no matter what the roster looks like. She'll fill arenas, she'll drive television ratings, she'll be the defining face of women's basketball for the foreseeable future. But there is a massive, fundamental difference between being great and winning championships, between putting up generational numbers and competing for titles in June, between being appointment viewing for casual fans and being the last team standing when it matters most. Clark has the ability to do all of it. The only question that matters right now is whether the Indiana front office is going to give her the supporting structure to actually get there, and everything available points to no. Consider this from Clark's perspective. She just completed one of the most extraordinary rookie seasons in WNBA history. She carried a franchise to national relevance through sheer individual brilliance. She showed up every single night, competed at an elite level, put up numbers that made the entire sports world pay attention, and expanded the audience for women's basketball in ways nobody had seen before. All of that happened with a roster that was clearly, visibly, statistically insufficient around her. And the front office's big off-season move is letting the one young player who fit perfectly around her walk to the defending champions for absolutely nothing. That's not just a bad basketball decision in isolation. That's a message sent, whether the front office intended it or not. The message is, we recognize the problem, but we won't make the hard choices to fix it. Players notice those messages. Generational players especially notice those messages because they understand better than anyone how much the roster around them affects what they're capable of accomplishing. The gap between what Clark could achieve with proper support and what she'll achieve dragging an under-supported roster to the playoffs. That gap is enormous, and it grows wider every off-season Indiana fails to address it seriously. Organizations have lost franchise cornerstones this way before, not always in dramatic trade demands or public fallingouts. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's a slow accumulation of decisions that suggest the people in charge don't fully grasp what they have, and a player eventually concludes that her prime years are too valuable to spend waiting for an organization to figure it out. Indiana doesn't have unlimited time to get this right. Clark's prime is happening now in real time, and every offseason spent making decisions like this one is an offseason that doesn't come back. The Fever front office needs to understand something clearly. Clark's patience, her commitment to Indiana, her willingness to pour everything into this franchise, these are not guaranteed permanent features of the situation. They are assets that depreciate when the people around her keep signaling that organizational comfort matters more than organizational ambition. One bad decision doesn't break a franchise, but patterns do, and Indiana has a pattern that is becoming impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark deserves better than this. The evidence of that has never been clearer than it is right now, watching Justina Parisien sign her Aces contract while Indiana counts on Damiris Dantas to somehow be the difference in a playoff series. At some point, somebody in the Indiana Fever organization has to be asked some very direct questions. not the standard media availability softballs about building for the future or respecting the process. Real questions, specific questions, the kind of questions that require actual basketball answers rather than corporate communication strategy. Why did Justina Parisien only get 3 minutes of preseason action when her performance in those 3 minutes demonstrated she was capable of contributing at the WNBA level? What was the specific basketball rationale for prioritizing Damiris Dantas over a younger player who fits more naturally with the franchise cornerstone? What does the actual development plan look like for young players in this organization, and what does a player need to do to earn genuine rotation consideration? Why wasn't Parisien promoted to a standard contract at any point during the regular season, when the floor spacing problem she could have addressed was visible in every single game? These aren't unfair questions. They aren't the questions of fans who don't understand how professional sports organizations work. They are the basic accountability measures that any competent front office should be able to address with clear, coherent, basketball-grounded answers. General Manager Amber Cox should be sitting in front of a camera explaining this decision in terms that make basketball sense. Not in terms of difficult choices and process trusting, in terms of actual roster construction logic that holds up under scrutiny. That accountability isn't coming, though. What's coming is carefully worded statements about respecting veteran contributions and believing in the current group and remaining committed to building something sustainable around Caitlin Clark. What's coming is the organizational equivalent of changing the subject while hopping the story fades before anyone looks too closely at the specifics. And then training camp will open and the roster will look largely the same and the floor spacing problem will still be there, and Clark will once again be asked to do more than any single player should have to do. Here's what should actually happen, even knowing it won't. The front office should look honestly at this offseason and acknowledge that the Parisien decision represents a failure, not of circumstance, not of budget constraints, not of bad luck, but of evaluation and execution. They had a player who fit their most pressing need. They failed to recognize her value properly. They failed to develop her in a way that would have made her departure difficult. And they failed to match an offer sheet that would have kept her in Indiana for the remainder of the season. Each one of those failures had a moment where a better decision was available. The front office chose differently at every single one of those moments. That's not a single mistake, that's a decision-making process that needs fundamental examination. Fever are going to spend the upcoming season hearing the same analysis from every broadcast team in the league. No floor spacing, defenses packing the paint, Clark getting doubled and having nowhere to go with the ball. And every time that narrative runs, the Parisien decision is going to be sitting right underneath it. The obvious, available, now-gone answer to the problem everyone can see. That's an uncomfortable position for any front office to defend, and the discomfort is entirely self-inflicted. Indiana had options. They could have promoted Parisien months ago. They could have restructured around her skills. They could have made the tough call to move on from a veteran who wasn't contributing to keep a young player who could. They chose none of those options. Now they're living with the consequences, and the consequences are going to follow them all season long. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't an impossible situation with no good options. This was a series of deliberate choices made by people paid to make the right ones, and they got it wrong at every turn. The Indiana Fever had Justina Parisien. They had months to use her, develop her, and build around her. They had 24 hours at the end to keep her. They walked away from all of it. The Las Vegas Aces recognized what Indiana missed. They valued it correctly. They moved decisively. That's the difference between organizations that win championships and organizations that talk about winning them. Parisien is in Las Vegas now. She's going to develop, contribute, compete, and grow in a system designed to make her better. Indiana is going to run back a roster with the same problems it had last season and wonder why the results don't change. Caitlin Clark is still in Indiana, still the most electric player in women's basketball, still waiting for the front office to match her level of commitment to winning. How long that patience holds is the real story to watch. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's keep this conversation going because the Indiana Fever front office needs to hear from fans who actually understand basketball.